It was the kind of romance that sparked gossip in the sleepy town of Greenridge, Ohio. 64-year-old Loretta Sims, a retired librarian with a reputation for kindness and a love of gardening, shocked her neighbors when she introduced her new husband, Elliot Pierce, a 31-year-old drifter with rugged good looks and an enigmatic charm. The couple married in a small courthouse ceremony on June 10, 2023, just 2 months after meeting at a local cafe where Loretta frequently wrote in her journal. Elliot, claiming to be a freelance artist and aspiring novelist, seemed to have swept Loretta off her feet with his romantic gestures and sweet words. To the outside world, it was a whirlwind romance fueled by passion, but to those who knew Loretta, it felt wildly out of character. Loretta had lived alone in her sprawling Victorian home since her husband, Douglas, passed away a decade ago. She was known for her quiet life, caring for her beloved rescue cats and tending to her rose garden. When Elliot entered her life, the change was dramatic. She started dressing more vibrantly, hosting small dinner parties, and speaking about adventures the couple planned to take. Yet, whispers about Elliot's intentions circulated the town. Why would someone like him want to marry a woman old enough to be his mother, was the question on everyone's lips. Loretta brushed off the criticism, claiming Elliot was different. He had given her a renewed sense of purpose. On June 12, 2 days after their marriage, Loretta didn't show up for her regular bridge club meeting. Her friends, concerned but hesitant to intrude, left messages on her phone that went unanswered. Later that evening, one of her closest friends, Nancy Carter, decided to stop by Loretta's house. When Nancy arrived, the house was eerily quiet. The porch light was off, and the usually inviting home felt unsettling. Nancy knocked on the door several times, but no one answered. She peered through the front window and saw that Loretta's cats were pacing anxiously near the door. Alarmed, Nancy called the Greenridge Police Department, who arrived within the hour. Officers entered the house and immediately noticed signs of a struggle in the living room. A coffee table was overturned, a lamp shattered, and there were faint smears of blood on the hardwood floor leading toward the basement. What they found in the basement chilled even the most seasoned officers. Loretta Sims lay lifeless at the foot of the stairs, her head resting in a pool of blood. Her arms bore defensive wounds, and her wedding ring was missing. An autopsy would later reveal that she had been bludgeoned to death with a blunt object, likely a cast-iron fireplace poker, which was found discarded nearby. The discovery sent shockwaves through Greenridge. Loretta, a beloved figure in the community, was gone, and the circumstances of her death pointed to foul play. Her new husband, Elliot, was nowhere to be found. Detective Maura Gillespie, a sharp-witted investigator with a reputation for solving high-profile cases, was called to the scene. The 38-year-old detective was methodical, starting her investigation with those who had last seen Loretta alive. She interviewed Nancy, who described Loretta's newfound joy, but also admitted that Elliot's sudden appearance in Loretta's life had raised red flags. When Detective Gillespie delved into Elliot's background, she uncovered alarming details. Elliot had a string of failed relationships and a history of financial troubles. He had been evicted multiple times, moved frequently, and had even been arrested for minor theft in another state. What was most troubling, however, was a pattern. Elliot had previously courted older women, all of whom had died under suspicious circumstances. As Detective Gillespie pieced together the timeline, she discovered that Elliot had withdrawn $15,000 from Loretta's savings account the day before her death. Surveillance footage from a nearby ATM showed him making the withdrawal while wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. The search for Elliot Pierce began in earnest. With his history and Loretta's murder pointing to him as the prime suspect, the police issued a nationwide alert. While the town of Greenridge mourned the loss of one of its own, Detective Gillespie vowed to bring Loretta's killer to justice. What no one yet realized was that Elliot's trail of destruction had only just begun. Detective Maura Gillespie worked tirelessly, uncovering more about Elliot Pierce's shadowy past. What she found was horrifying. Elliot wasn't just a grieving widower. He had a history of relationships with older women that often ended in tragedy. The deeper Gillespie dug, the clearer the pattern became. 10 years earlier, in a small town in Indiana, Elliot had been romantically involved with Margaret Thorne, a 62-year-old widow. Just 3 months after they met, Margaret was found drowned in her bathtub. The authorities ruled it an accident, chalking it up to a slip, but Margaret's family had always doubted the conclusion. They said she was terrified of water and never took baths. Then there was Helen Sloan, 68, who died in a house fire in Kansas. Official reports attributed the fire to faulty wiring, but neighbors had seen a young man leaving Helen's property shortly before the blaze. No one had thought much of it at the time. Helen's death, too, was labeled a tragic accident, and there were others. Patricia Mills, 70, had suffered a fatal fall down a staircase. Diana Croft, 65, died from carbon monoxide poisoning. Every case bore striking similarities: a whirlwind romance with Elliot, mysterious circumstances, and financial irregularities discovered only after the women were gone. The mounting evidence painted Elliot as a cunning predator who charmed his way into the lives of older women, only to exploit their trust before leaving them dead and their bank accounts drained. With this new information, Detective Gillespie issued a nationwide alert, warning authorities in nearby towns to be on the lookout for Elliot. 3 days after Loretta's murder, a breakthrough came. A motel clerk in Dayton, Ohio, recognized Elliot's photo from the news. He had checked in under the name Eric Palmer, a fake identity. The clerk described him as nervous, pacing the lobby late at night, and constantly glued to his phone. By the time police arrived, Elliot had already fled, leaving behind a road map with several small towns circled. Detective Gillespie's stomach churned as she studied the map. Each circle marked an area with isolated communities and vulnerable populations, the kind of places where Elliot might find his next victim. The clock was ticking. It was a woman named Martha Clark who provided the next critical lead. Martha, 59, lived just 2 towns over from Greenridge and had recently met a charming man online who called himself Eric Palmer. He had swept her off her feet with his smooth talk and promises of a new beginning, but something about him didn't sit right with her. When he began asking probing questions about her finances and home, her unease grew. Martha saw the news about Elliot on television and immediately called the Greenridge Police Department. Detective Gillespie wasted no time asking Martha to arrange another meeting with Eric while undercover officers monitored the situation. On the evening of June 18th, Martha met Elliot at a quiet cafe. He arrived dressed impeccably, his charm on full display. He smiled warmly and leaned in, clasping her hands in his. But his composure cracked when plainclothes officers surrounded the table and placed him under arrest. Back at the station, Elliot's act continued. He wept, claiming he was a victim of circumstance, misunderstood and unfairly targeted. "I loved Loretta," he sobbed. "I would never hurt her." Detective Gillespie wasn't convinced. She pressed him on his pattern of relationships and the suspicious deaths that followed him everywhere he went. Elliot's defenses began to crumble, and his demeanor turned cold. "You think you know everything," he hissed. "You don't know the half of it." The cryptic remark lingered in Gillespie's mind. What was he hiding? What didn't she know? Elliot Pierce was behind bars, but Detective Maura Gillespie felt the case was far from over. His chilling words, "You don't know the half of it," played on a loop in her mind. What was Elliot implying? As she pored over evidence late into the night, a disturbing question arose. Could there be another victim? A thorough review of the map found in Elliot's motel room revealed something critical. One of the circled towns, Rockdale, had reported a missing woman just a week before Loretta's murder. The woman, Virginia Cole, was a 61-year-old widow who had vanished without a trace after meeting a man from an online dating site. Her car was found abandoned at the edge of a wooded area, her purse emptied, and her home showed no signs of a struggle. The investigation had stalled, but Elliot's connection to Rockdale couldn't be ignored. Gillespie made the 2-hour drive to Rockdale the following morning and met with local law enforcement. The lead detective, Paul Reiner, shared details about Virginia's disappearance. She went out for dinner with some guy she met online, but no one knows who he is, Reiner explained. Her neighbors saw her leave that night. She never came back. The pieces fit too well to be coincidence. Detective Gillespie requested Virginia's financial records, and what she found was damning. 4 days before Loretta's murder, someone had transferred $20,000 from Virginia's savings account to an untraceable offshore account. Surveillance footage from an ATM confirmed it. Elliot, disguised with a baseball cap and sunglasses, had made the withdrawal back in Greenridge. Gillespie confronted Elliot with the evidence. His reaction was unnerving. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. "You're good, detective," he said, "but you're still playing catch-up." Gillespie's frustration mounted. She demanded to know what happened to Virginia Cole, but Elliot maintained his silence, his smugness unshakable. Without a body, a murder charge in Virginia's case was impossible. Gillespie had no choice but to focus on solidifying the case against him for Loretta's murder. But the investigation took a dramatic turn the next day, when a hiker in Rockdale stumbled upon human remains buried in a shallow grave in the woods. The body was wrapped in a floral bedsheet, later identified as one missing from Virginia Cole's home. The coroner confirmed her identity through dental records and ruled her death a homicide. The cause of death: blunt force trauma. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small town, but for Gillespie, it was a moment of grim validation. She now had proof that Elliot's crimes spanned beyond Greenridge. Gillespie returned to the interrogation room, determined to break Elliot. She described in vivid detail the evidence tying him to Virginia's murder: the bedsheet, the ATM footage, and the financial transfers. She painted a picture of the walls closing in on him. "You've run out of places to hide, Elliot," she said firmly. "It's over." For a moment, Elliot's cocky facade wavered. His jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the table. "I didn't want it to end like that," he murmured, barely audible. Gillespie leaned in. "Then tell me what happened." Elliot's confession came in a disjointed torrent. He described how he had met Virginia through a dating app and quickly ingratiated himself into her life. She had been kind, trusting, and eager for companionship. He admitted to luring her into the woods under the guise of a romantic walk, only to kill her when she confronted him about inconsistencies in his story. "I panicked," he said, his voice devoid of remorse. "She wouldn't stop asking questions. I couldn't let her ruin everything." His lack of empathy chilled Gillespie to the core. Elliot's admission cemented his role not just as a con artist, but as a cold-blooded killer. She immediately worked with prosecutors to add Virginia's murder to the growing list of charges against him. But even as the case built momentum, Gillespie couldn't shake the feeling that Elliot's cryptic words still held weight. Was Virginia truly his last victim, or were there others yet to be uncovered? The trial of Elliot Pierce became a national spectacle, exposing the sinister depths of his charm and manipulation. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Sylvia Marlowe, presented a compelling case, weaving together the stories of Loretta Sims and Virginia Cole. The hidden details of Elliot's prior relationships were also introduced, painting him as a serial predator who preyed on older women for financial gain. Surveillance footage, financial records, and Elliot's confession formed the backbone of the evidence. Marlowe emphasized how Elliot exploited his victims' vulnerabilities, building their trust before turning to violence when his lies unraveled. She described Loretta's murder as the culmination of years of calculated cruelty. The testimony of Detective Maura Gillespie, detailing the painstaking investigation that brought Elliot to justice, was a key moment in the trial. Elliot's defense attempted to shift blame, portraying him as a man plagued by poverty and desperation. They argued that his actions were impulsive rather than premeditated, urging the jury to consider manslaughter over murder. But Elliot's own demeanor, a mixture of arrogance and detachment, undermined their case. His smirk, which appeared whenever victims' names were mentioned, drew audible gasps from the courtroom. On October 23, 2023, after deliberating for only 3 hours, the jury returned a verdict: guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The sentence was swift and severe: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Elliot was led out of the courtroom. His expression remained unreadable. He offered no apologies, no final words. For Loretta's friends and Virginia's family, the verdict brought a measure of closure, but the scars of his crimes would linger. Detective Gillespie sat quietly in the gallery as the sentencing concluded. She had pieced together the puzzle of Elliot's crimes, yet she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that there were other victims left undiscovered. During his confession, Elliot had alluded to more secrets he hadn't revealed, and Gillespie knew his type. He thrived on control and withholding the truth. She left the courtroom resolved to keep his file open, determined to revisit every unsolved case that bore his signature. In Greenridge, Loretta Sims' home became a symbol of resilience. Her garden, once tended with love, was revived by neighbors who refused to let her memory fade. In Rockdale, Virginia Cole's family worked to establish a fund to help vulnerable seniors avoid predatory relationships. Though Elliot Pierce was behind bars, the impact of his crimes reverberated. For Detective Gillespie, the case served as a stark reminder of the evil that could hide behind a charming smile and the enduring strength of those determined to seek justice.